Bartering a poem for Lola Mae Fulmer. Out of chloride, out of oatman, the miners blow in. Out of the Surbats, they shuffle forward into the cafe where Lola, my grandmother, works. Busted, they offer turquoise for coffee, a silver necklace for eggs and toast, copper earrings as a tip. That was the 50s. That was Kingman. By the time I arrive on the scene, the Oak Ridge boys sing from the jukebox and I get pancakes for weekly chores. Roads are paved, although sidewalks are still for cities. I toss Nerf footballs until the goat heads of every drop pass pick them to foam in the 70s. Now I've been wanting to write about my grandmother, about how, when she died, we found her box of bartered jewelry, about how I took a necklace with me. Like the sad boots of those miners roaming the high desert, I'm more pieces than plans. I wish to speak a language of dirt, where what was chiseled, hauled, loaded, and downright blown up sticks to whatever you wear, to your flesh, to your hair, and you walk wherever you will, covered in the armor of that busted up syntax. An intelligent, strong-willed woman looks over the mess. She will put coffee in front of you. You will say something like, "I am James J. Don't you remember me? I don't need to work retail anymore now that I'm here. Today, I quit my job, and I too hate taxes. Look at my shirt, don't you see?" The woman will look again and say, "Boy, handsome boy, you're right. Writing poems is more important than paying taxes, at least until they arrest you. So, what's that you got on your wrist?"
Welcome to another edition of Poets in Montana. I'm speaking with James J. today, and we're lucky enough to have James in the studio because he came to Montana on a visit after about a decade away. James and I met in 97, probably, at the University of Montana, and the rest is history.
Yeah, 97. We were both in that MFA program here in the University of Montana, and that was a fortunate thing to run across you there. You know, I had come up here a few years before, and it just didn't really strike me. That particular program didn't really click for me. Went back to work in actually retail, as that poem suggests. I wrote this poem about towards the end of that time, and did all that, and then after a couple of years, I thought, well, I should see how it goes. I really wanted to study, like Greg Pape was up here at the time, really wanted to study with him, and wanted to make a go of it. And I ran across you and several other folks that were it was just night and day. It was just folks that, some people you just click with and some you don't.
Right.
And that was key to those workshops, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things that, besides just being, for whatever reason, people are attracted to one another on a personal level, but which is also probably dictates the kind of stuff you read or gravitate towards. And like listening to you read that poem again, which I knew was from that time, and those, I can just hear kind of those rhythms, those long lines of like Ginsberg,
Yeah.
Because you were into the Gins and I was into the beats, and which was not exactly typical of most of the people who were in the MFA program at that time. Sure.
You still had a big influence from Richard Hugo, obviously, that established the program, and he's not. His style isn't that long, open sort of line. If we were to get sort of technical, right? I like having that unstressed syllable and that stressed syllable, and kind of really open that line up, push it to 13, 14 syllables long. And that's which Allen Ginsberg, Walt Whitman, those sort of folks, that's what they did. And yeah, that was a little different than Hugo's was more.
And Hugo's was, never went over like basically iambic, like a 5-beat line or whatever. And then, we also enjoyed the verse of one of the more refined American poets, Charles Bukowski.
That's true. There was you still had Bukowski around. Still was in his heyday of being read, and we were younger, and well, and that narrative element, that's certainly the way that he would, he would blend that narrative element into that, I guess as far as the way that he always have a great image or metaphor
Right.
running through that, but it's definitely more narrative story driven.
And kind of, punching. Those words kind of punched. Which, kind of another thing that I guess we had in common, I thought, was that sort of a background in sports type competition, though, that kind of thing. I mean, and the Andre the Giant poems, which
Right,
are in there.
right.
And humor. You have a lot of humor, I think, in your poetry.
Well, I feel like, in some point, it seems like it's kind of silly to just keep writing these poems and doing our things. I imagine as many writers feel that sort of, you can either feel sad or laugh about it, right? So I think that there's a certain amount of humor that has to come in there too.
Well, why don't you read us something like that?
Sure, I'll find Andre the Giant. The nice thing is this, I just picked up this collection that back again from you, Mark.
Yes.
This was Ed Leahy's when Ed Leahy was with us. A book I'd signed for him years ago. Ed Leahy was just, he was
the guy.
he was something else. He was the champion.
As Roger, which we'll get to talking about Roger Dunsmore later too, but Roger always called Ed the de facto Poet Laureate of Montana before they even thought about doing that kind of a thing.
Yeah. I mean, he eventually got the governor's award, and
Right.
he got his medals and
Yeah, he got his
championships
accolades on the way out the door.
Yeah, which isn't that amazing? I always thought that was one of the last times I'd been up here was when Ed was getting that award in Helena from the
Right.
governor. So
Right.
yeah,
That
for
was
lifetime achievement.
2005, I think, maybe, or somewhere in
Yeah,
there.
I think I got one more reading with you here after that. But yeah, the last time I was here for a while, and that was something to see. So I got Mark got this after Ed passed on, and picked up his took care of a lot of his legacy, and he kept a lot of his things intact, and he had one of the books I'd signed for him. So, and so along the lines of champions, larger than life characters like Ed Leahy. This is early on. I would write a bit about Andre the Giant. He'd make his way. Other pro wrestlers would make their way into my poems. So I'm just gonna let him because couldn't stop him. So may as well go with the flow. And this was about Andre the Giant wrestling his arch nemesis, Bruiser, and all kinds of things happened. Andre continues his undefeated streak at the Amboy Sports Arena. And one night, Andre the Giant just went up. Hell of a move, really. Bruiser had him by the throat, white scarred fingers clawing and shaking, pinching into an upset. Then Andre countered by countering gravity. Andre hefted his great head back, exhaled, and there he went. It caught on too, spread like hose water through a manicured lawn. Bruiser and referee drifted into the stumped air. Ring posts with a creak came off. Ropes, mats, springs, 2x4s, folding chairs washed about in an eddy. The lights from the overheads warped like slinkies on stairs. Pops and clicks of cameras, shrieks and clapping of hands. Some fans spooked, a pack of wily coyotes whirling in place. Some searched their programs for a clue. Bruiser clung to the rafters and cried. The ref called the whole thing a draw. The promoter tried to charge for seating on the ceiling. Those in the cheap seats found as good a view as any. And I was glad to be there, to see light roam as free as smoke, to feel the sweat on my face crawl into the clamor, to smell the joy and bones of muscles searching for new functions. And I was glad to be there to see what Andre could do if really pressed, to see the beauty of humans left to feel like angels, to see myself lost in a dome of possibilities. For the next day, the newspapers chalked the whole thing up as sports entertainment. And Bruiser, rebuilt by his same old tough guy words, demanded a rematch over at your place.
Oh, that's
the
wonderful.
Giant. Yeah.
The whole cinematic aspect of that thing and the sort of, dreamlike, magical action of everything going up. That's classic, man.
I never quite got to see Andre the Giant in real life. I got to see a couple of pro wrestling matches. My dad was, I'd go visit him in the summers in Long Beach, California, stay out there 6-8 weeks. And And that was the 80s, where things were really going with that professional wrestling.
Right.
And so there was one time at the Amboy, the Amboy Sports Arena is what I referred to there, but one time in Long Beach at whatever their local venue was, and then also even the Coliseum there in LA and that type of stuff. I got to see it. He was always booked, but he was so old by the end, then things were catching up with him and that type of thing. So I got to see.
He decided to go into movies at that
He
point.
went to movies, other stuff where it was safer. So Ricky the Dragon Steamboat, and some of those guys, the guys that were always working, but never quite got to see Andre.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I love, like I say, the cinematic, and then just the humor, because I mean that was one aspect of, I think, professional wrestling, is there was always the humor aspect.
Yeah.
It was like you knew nobody was actually going to die. There was a performance to it.
Yeah. So,
Well,
so I'd write about Andre in the days until in fact, I came up with a system with haiku. How we think of 575 syllables for a haiku. So did a little math and came up with 17 total syllables. So I'd start writing 17 haiku groups. So a haiku for each syllable, except that Andre the Giant's just too big to fit into this haiku.
There you go.
So I ended up coming up with a series of Andre the Giant haiku and that type of thing.
So so there are 17 of those.
And there's 17 haiku, Andre the Giant haiku. They're fit in there, as well as other more narrative poems like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Cool. And this was Gorski Press.
This was Gorski Press out of Los Angeles. Yeah.
Right, and as well as the other succeeding books.
They've ran 3 of them for me, which those guys are fantastic to work with. They mostly do punk rock magazines. They're a nonprofit.
Right.
For a while, they were the only nonprofit punk rock magazine publisher on the planet.
Right. Yeah. And what was that magazine that they used
Razor
to do?
Cake.
Razor Cake. Yeah. Razor Cake.
And then, as well as they did books too. They did poetry, fiction, a little bit of everything, nonfiction.
Right.
So it was great to get in with those guys. And then it was also, in addition, Sean Carswell was the main editor. I worked with that, and he's absolutely brilliant.
Yes.
So he was always great to work with. And then they'd also set up book tours, and it would be fun because a lot of them would have connection to that music scene. Yeah. And so I'd do places where it'd be like, mostly like kind of punk rock shows. So before the show, you come up and do your thing, and it was just a blast. It was big audiences. I don't think we sold any books, but they were, they get a lot of
great audience.
Yeah, they come over afterwards, and they give you a compliment, or that was great. And then along those lines, they had a pretty big following. And at one point, when Borders and Barnes and Nobles and the big box were popular, we had a statistic that Gorski Press books were the top shoplifted books at Borders. So didn't make any money there, but there were a lot of fans, and so a lot of the copies got stolen off the shelf. And
joined Abby Hoffman steal his book, in the classic section.
Right. So that was a lot, but that was a lot of fun. Those were great tours, and getting a chance to meet people one on one.
So did those guys? Were they sort of? They obviously helped you out, but were they also sort of the impetus for you to go into publishing on your own?
I think a little bit, yeah. Because I ended up running with Two Dogs Press there, a short run of about a half dozen books. And doing these sort of smaller runs. I was working with Thor Nolan as the main person that was doing that with. He now works for Amazon, and the site more is kind of fairly high up over there, doing things that go on in offices and securing.
Yeah, is he still? He's in Seattle then.
He's in Seattle, and he's also outside of Flagstaff. So he's in a couple locations. So
you still run into him?
Yeah. So he was the one that we were doing that I was doing that with, and I think the thing with that is we never had the idea that we were going to try to be like Copper Canyon Press or these long established wonderful presses, but we didn't have that sort of means to. Put out a catalog of 100 books.
Right.
So.
But to a handful of those of us here in Montana, it was like the moon and the stars.
And that's what we really wanted to do. In fact, when we were talking earlier about some of the chapbooks and some of the folks that we did, like some of the chapbooks that you can't really, there'd be gorgeous chapbooks.
Right.
it's hard to sell that book. There's no spine, and
Yeah,
it's. I mean, this is
totally.
something that a reader, that a poet can sell to an audience one-on-one. But they're great. But there would be, what do you know? They're harder to sell, that kind of thing. So so what we wanted to do was have something where we could get just a nice spine.
Sit on the
Gorgeous
shelf.
cover,
somebody goes,
right?
oh,
Yeah.
what's the name of that?
Yeah,
Let's
oh
see,
yeah, let's see.
Totally.
That's yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So that's what we knew we weren't going to do it forever. You know,
Right.
so we're going to get 5 or 6 or whatever books out there. A couple of year run, and we're going to and we had a chance to do some of Thor's connections and his skills. He could make sure that we were landing the books in libraries,
Right.
and that we were getting some distribution out to casting a little wider net.
Right.
And then the key was to have a poet that was tied very much to community, which Missoula,
yeah.
Montana, right?
Yeah,
That's,
yeah.
So that was.
Yeah, I mean, that everybody that was associated kind of through the university, a lot of them just never left. Students that came here and then they just never left, and as well as Roger Dunsmore worked at the university, and then Dave Thomas was he came here in '65 or whatever, and took a few trips, but he always came back here.
Yeah. So it was great that was our goal, to come up with a good-looking book that could place into libraries and onto the shelf, and then the poets would take it from there as far as the ability to have that connection with the community, to read.
Which is what poets have to always do anyway, pretty much. I mean, unless maybe I don't know who. If you're, Wrigley or something, but then I take that back, because I saw on the social media the other day that Wrigley was trying to read from his new book, Robert Wrigley, down in Moscow, and he was milking it. He was come on out to the local bookstore and see me read, because that's what we have to do for the most part.
Yeah,
it's not a bestseller.
And that's talking with the guys at Gorski Press and Sean Carswell, and one of the things that with the poets that they have, that I remember him saying this to me, that like poets will push a book for a couple of years, right? They'll keep doing that. More with fiction, it's got a point where it can sell, and it has a shorter lifespan, right? And
disappears.
And then even the writer's moving on to something else, and it kind of people still uncover stuff, of course, but the writer's not really pushing it. But he's like, oh yeah, the poets keep flogging those books and getting the most out of them, and so even he knows, as the publisher, like the different shelf life and how long you can really push those, and you can tour on those things a couple of years later. Poetry tends to last a little bit longer.
I think it lasts a lot longer, and part of that being is that what it tends to deal with, I think, in a very short period of time. I mean, I think that's part of it. It's just the shortness of it.
Yeah.
That's why it's more appealing, I think, in a reading than a fiction writer that tries to give you some kind of an indication of. They give you an indication of what they're like as a writer and their voice, but it's really hard to get much of a handle on what the hell's going on with what that novel might be, as opposed to somebody that just reads you a poem. So why don't you read us another poem?
Sure. Should I? Maybe I'll pick a different.
Pick another book.
Different book.
Is your second book?
The second book, The Journeyman. So I'll read that a little bit. But I was thinking with, as far as with the publishing side of things, kind of circling back to that a minute, that was just a blast to be able to work on that other side of it for at least a few years, and really work with folks such as yourself, Roger Dunsmore, who absolutely brilliant. And I'd seen all those when I used to work in a bookstore some, and I'd see all those chapbooks that he had, and that was part of my motivation, because I thought this stuff's brilliant. In fact, I've had the privilege to meet Roger now personally, talked to him a few times. Absolutely delightful person, wonderful to talk to, but intellectually, and he was intimidating to me. He had so much, and he had such a career, and as you were saying, he's teaching at the university, and it was just such an intellect, and I couldn't believe that he was willing to say yes. Let's hop on in there and try to. He had a great collection put together called Tiger Hill, it was wonderful. Like, well, I'm glad he's willing to take a chance with me, because I thought I wanted to get just a good looking cover and a a gorgeous
Right.
book that.
Right. And you know, and since we're still here, before you jump
Yeah.
into that, because I visited with Roger just the other day, but I mean, he was a professor at the university for 40 years, but as far as a poet goes, and as far as his poetry and that sort of aspect of him, he was an outsider, and he felt like an outsider in terms of sort of the literary aspect on campus, you might say. And so I came into him through a reading series that they used to do down upstairs in the old Union Hall that Roger was a part of, and Ed Leahy and John Holbrook and Dave Thomas. And so that's how I met Roger. And Roger's a incredibly intelligent, gifted, wonderful teacher, intellect, and he's a wild man too.
Yeah.
So that's what I loved about
Which
him.
is where those poems come from, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, that's why I knew. Yeah, his essays and that sort of writing for sure,
Right.
And the poetry is just a joy to to be able to feature and hop in on that. I think I'll do since my wife and kids are here and hanging out in this gorgeous library, so I'll do one for my wife and how we met. There's in Flagstaff, Arizona, there's a hill in town called Mars Hill that just gorgeous little spot. You can kind of do a little quick hike right from the downtown and get out there, just similar to Missoula.
Like Sentinel or Jumbo.
Yeah, you can be hiking anywhere pretty fast. And so when we had first met, we'd hike up that Mars Hill. It's also the spot where Percival Lowell discovered Pluto. So back when Pluto used to be considered a planet.
Right.
I still say it's a planet.
It reminds me of the John Prine song, you know. Well, that's another story.
So it's known for that sort of stellar observation in that area. In addition to, you can just walk up there when you're hoping to impress,
bump into somebody.
Yeah, hoping to impress somebody, or go a little hike, or just sip a little whiskey on the side and get a chance to talk to someone. So this is called Mars Hill. This is for Allison. That night hike up Mars Hill, a flask of John Powers going down fast, my fingers brushing your hand on the exchange. Big full moon and light rain that morphed to sheets of snow as we climbed to the log where we found ourselves a seat. You leaning in to kiss me too scared to go first. Wet lips, snow-drenched faces and heads, followed by the firm hold of hands as we leapt back down the trail like Jack and Jill. The tale revised as if by dumb angels who scribbled sweet, naive edits with no flair for drama, simply stupid enough to wish to help, who worked the soles of our feet to keep us from falling familiarly down, who erased twisted ankles, who brushed aside sticks, stones, kept our shoes tied, our strides in step. The angels whose pens are filled with the ink of surviving so many falls before, the dumb angels that earn the calluses that guide us, the light of stars caught in the scars on their barely visible cheeks.
Nice.
Yeah.
I love poem.
Yeah. So, that's a great little spot. You can still get up there. It's not too overly developed yet.
Yeah.
So a lot of times too that I'd, with poetry, you end up writing about those small little occasions and then seeing what happens. And I think for a lot of us, you get that impulse, certain image, sound, whatever it might be, and then after that, it's a surprise to the poet as well with what happens next.
Right. I don't know about you, but I know that, I still go back to, memory and experience from the past in poems, but a lot of that ground I covered a while back now at this point, you know what I mean? So that material is there, and so you kind of morph into a different sort of place a lot of times, and so you find yourself becoming maybe a different kind of a poet in a way. It's not any different. I mean, you're the same idiot that you always were in your head, but it's like you've told most of your stories.
Yeah.
And once in a while I go back and find one. Oh, I haven't told this one, Yeah.
And that's the key as you get older too, that everyone sort of knows your stories, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So poetry allows you to keep a little different angle on those stories.
But we should never, shit ourselves into thinking that you can't read the same poem again because no one remembers anything.
That's true. That's yeah.
I tell myself that anyway.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and you do get those very kind souls that will attend readings, several times over the course of several years,
it's like,
and they'll say, "Oh, I enjoyed hearing it again," or "I didn't get this out of it," or.
Well, I mean, it's like spinning records, right? Which is kind of what led me into the idea of poetry to begin with. But how many times do you listen to a record over and over again until you memorize the lyrics?
Do you
like
wear
John
it out?
Bryan.
Yeah. Well, and that's what your writing course is incredibly musical, and that was one of the things early on when we were in those workshops that you're willing to get those. Not only the sound, the delivery, the musicality. Sometimes to go ahead and quote John Prine and the Beatles and to have fun with it.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, that was. And that was another thing, I guess, maybe that you were in your mid-20s, were you? Late 20s when you came to the program?
Yeah.
And I was a little over 40 at that time, so I felt kind of like a generation past, but with most everybody else, but we seemed to connect on things for some reason, so that was...
Yeah. Well, and I think that's part of what was appealing too also of being in Missoula, that it was similar enough to where I'd come from in Arizona with Flagstaff, similar population and that type of thing, and also just that the way that yourself, but also a lot of writers were willing to write about this region. I mean, I think that came from Hugo, and from that it became universal and bigger. So there were those connections. I could write about working in the plastics factory in Kingman out in the high desert, and it still had a lot of connections with the sort of, if someone was working out at the old mill here. So there were still a lot of connections to be made.
And I think that some people might say that, we have maybe a working class level of poetry or something. They would use that term working class. But I mean, what it seems to me is that when you look across the West, I think, in general, there's kind of an egalitarian, and maybe it's because everybody's about half broke, or the majority of the people are not really wealthy or anything. Although I think that's obviously changing now. We're seeing more and more trophy houses all over the place. But it used to be that was how you lived your life, and so why wouldn't that, if you're going to write about where you're at and where you come from, why wouldn't that be the kind of poems that you would hear, right?
Yeah.
That sound like working class.
It is funny, that term working class, because we've all worn that label at various points, and we're the working class writer or poet, and it is funny, like, who isn't working is what I thought. Like, everyone I know is. So, of course you end up writing about that a bit, and it comes out in different sort of ways. And
totally. It may be, I mean, sometimes maybe part of it is imagery. You can, just because if your job is somewhat tied to the ground or to the earth in different ways, the sea or whatever it may be, you incorporate those images as opposed to being like in a cubicle in a building or something, having that kind of a working class job.
Yeah.
It's a different sort of venue, you know?
Right.
Not as exciting, maybe.
Yeah, I suppose
more heady.
Yeah. I didn't quite do that long in that sort of environment, but I did like retail management for a couple of years, which was pretty close. And I loved getting out on the sales floor and working the cash register. And in most management, you're not supposed to. Right. It seems like everyone tries to get promoted so they can be in a back office somewhere.
Right.
Oh, I wasn't there. I was a couple of years. I wasn't there all that long, but I was. That was not my. That was the best part.
Because you could encounter people and stuff.
Right, you encounter people,
watch things.
And be it's more tactile. Even if it's just bagging I was up for a bookstore, so even if it's just bagging the books and restocking this and that, as opposed to getting together the reports for the corporate office stuff back when they had fax machines.
Which is another thing that I want to mention is that we worked together for a season or a year or whatever for a moving company. James was in need of work, and he wound up here, and so he came to work. And when I was kind of thumbing through the books the other day, when I had more time to thumb through the books, I found that one in I don't know if it's in journeyman or undercards. It was an old lumping kind of poem. You were writing about moving furniture.
Yeah,
What
yeah,
was
yeah.
that poem?
That was a blast. Well, as far as a little more of the backstory there too, I think you're being fairly humble too, because I was crapped out or outside of Portland. Couldn't my aunt was I would sometimes stay at her place in Amboy, Washington. Folks are familiar with that. Not a big town, a great town, but not a big town. Not a whole lot of work opportunities. I think he left a message when you could leave message on the answer machines and that kind of stuff that, hey, we're hiring out here if you could make it up.
If you could limp that old pickup
Yeah,
in.
I had that old white 88 Ford,
Yeah.
and I limped it this way. So I needed that work, and I appreciated having that work. I wasn't getting any success. I think they had a strike. I think at Portland at that time there was a strike on the docks. There wasn't, as far as they were in, not going to cross anything like that. So I want to be a scab. It's hard to get in. I had bartending skills. It's hard to get into as an outsider, to get into the bar scene in a place, and so there were so and I could go back to the office type of things. Wasn't super excited about that, so I was glad to get out there. And I mean, it was and I was, when someone's broke in in any job, you're so glad to have. And then it turned out though, that whole crew and working with those guys, they were some of the kindest folks I'd worked with, as far as just bringing me right in as an outsider and including me in on things. And it was fantastic. So I ended up writing about those guys in some ways with the poem too, is that it's like saying thank you. So I wanted to say thank you.
And
to
that's
that.
like, I see, I'm with Leaf back in several of your old books, and a lot of the poems are dedicated. And people ask me that kind of thing all the time. It's like, well, I say you dedicate all your poems. Well, not all of them, but I mean a lot of them, because you're thinking of somebody. And so it's like a gift or a way of just saying, hey, thank you.
Yeah.
This one's for you.
And even if the actual poem might start with, it might veer way off. Right? Because you have no idea where these poems are going, but you're thinking of someone or an impulse or something kind that someone did for you, and there it goes.
Yeah. Do you want to read that one?
Yeah. It might take me a
minute to find it.
Need
your glasses.
I might need my glasses to. A lot of these I could go with before. I was telling Mark earlier that I was saying that right at the beginning of this pandemic, my vision dropped from about, I could see far away, 2015, but I got into my early 50s, and all of a sudden I needed these reading glasses, about 2040, 2060 on this. Of course, everything's switched now to electronic, credit cards, and so fortunately I had a few of the poems memorized back in the day, even if I hadn't seen them for a while.
Right.
And as far as find some particularities, I'm going to have to.
I knew I should have marked it. Oh, there it is, right there. 38. There's one anyway. Right here.
You've got the hot hand. All right. Oh yeah, storage and transfer. There we go. All right, I'll give it the quick read. I got all of it.
Yeah. The quick scan.
The quick scan. Eyes. I'll need the glasses.
Like those old grandmas with those, when they were getting the cataracts and they had those big focus lenses.
It's great. We do annual Robert Burns supper at the pub where I'm at, and Jude McKenzie, who's just fantastic, runs the Celtic Festival in our community, and. So I was going to read one of the Robert Burns poems, and it was one I think someone had asked. It wasn't one of the ones I had in my head, and so I was kind of looking through the book and that type of thing. So Jude let me borrow her glasses, and they're great. And they were just absolutely perfect, and kind of decorative, and like so. After that, I was feeling brave enough that I'll get any sort of glass I like. Even if that looks like I might have old lady glasses on there, but that's okay. Functional and maybe a little
like
festive.
Mrs. Davis, my old second grade teacher.
Yeah. Eventually we'll all get to looking like Mrs. Davis.
With the little string that hooks to the earpieces you can hang down in front.
We could go on we have like 10 more hours, right? Go on about the beads. Storage and transfer. Off to Ovando, to uncrate, to unpack, to assemble a table that seats a dozen .com millionaires. Or up Petty Creek with a dozen Persian rugs to unroll, insured for $1.7 million and bouncing in the back of an exhaust-leaking pack van. I know you remember that van. Yeah. Or any other cherry run, lots of drive time with limited lumping. It all turns out to be a break for the back. Cherry runs a day unglazed by so much sweat and dog fur. No middle-class sofas and hide-a-beds, no torn and worn OS furniture. 1.5s, 3 cubes, wardrobes, dish packs, the hours of packing and loading, converting a lifestyle into 18,000 of freight, an inventory of SOs, W7s, 12s, the condition of the crap they got. A Dr. Seuss-like language speaking their status, their place, their worth. Still, I have to tell you, cherry run or not, today when the grandfather clock arrives on the dock and I unscrew the crate, revealing the 7-foot beast to be checked, to be signed off, to be passed along. Still, I can't help but want to power screw Jimbo Hates You right into its face. 12 numbers and confused hands wearing my brand. A cherry run still, I want to screw its insurance policy into its pendulum slot. What cowardice, what courage, what compassion keeps me at bay? What sends me after the nearby ocean manual instead? Sends screws 5 ways through it, makes me pitch the manual on the break room table for all to see my work, my art, my possibility. There it rests, service notice, I'm leaving for the day, showing I'll be back on time tomorrow, because tonight, after a fistful of beers, Jimbo won't really hate millionaires. They have mothers too, even .com ones must. And when I'm yes-mamming and yes-sirring in my clean work shirt, I'll be thinking inside my thick skull about what holds my calloused hands, puts them to work on something else common. What is it that Jimbo hates? Instinct? Or maybe he just doesn't know when to carve or when to crate or when to fight or flee or when to flee like hell. Yeah, that's
There you go.
that
Yeah.
is funny. That's thinking about those. That then they had to keep the windows up, or else the exhaust would get back in the where you're sitting back in the cab.
Yeah, well, and and the reflection of all that broke down old equipment and stuff, and then the business that was keeping you afloat, which was, sort of catering to super wealthy people with super oversized stuff in these massively large houses. And that's poetry has always been political, particularly for working class people. But it's got a whole new look to it now. The situation, and so there was a precursor to what we knew was coming. It's like that Mcneese poem you sent me the other day. You have that on your phone, or you?
I can pull it from my bag if.
Let's
I've
do
got,
that.
I can. So I'll we're traveling around, kind of impromptu. Decided to get back to Missoula, hang out as long as we could, and so I just was reading through just poems in the mornings, inclined to do before everyone wakes up and gets rolling. And I found this one to posterity, and it's written in 1957. And I think it's pretty darn amazing. And there's a lot of times too that it seems like that there's a.
And the poet's name again?
Is Louis Mcneese, Irish poet. He was contemporary of W.H. Auden. They were friends. They had several. They went to Iceland together at the same time, and it's been around between the World War I and II.
When they were young.
Then when they were younger, they'd written letters, had this long correspondence over the years. So he's contemporary of Auden, but everyone's sort of, if you're going to get into that right after World War II type of poetry that you're reading, Auden's the big shot, right? Or at least how we get taught in school. So I found him later on when I had gotten kind of interested in thinking about just different Irish studies programs and whatnot. So I didn't really start reading him 5 or 6 years ago. And I'd seen the name, seen him in an anthology here and there, but I hadn't spent any time with him. So I figured I'd just kind of randomly start pulling up some stuff, and I found one that I thought was pretty relevant to the day.
You're also, I have, kind of come from an Irish heritage, but I was not really super familiar with Irish literature, but, the main people that everybody's familiar with, Yeats and the like. But so you kind of introduced me to a whole range of Irish poets because you really got into the Irish poetry, and you went over there and you interviewed.
It was Dennis Grieg over there. Dennis Grieg,
yeah,
steelworker poet in Belfast.
Yeah.
So, and in fact, I got to go over there, and that was just a blast. And and Rennie Grieg is his wife, who writes plays, and is also a terrific writer in her own in her own way. And she'd gone over to Washington D.C. on a grant I'm not sure she was directing plays but basically to continue to work on her craft too. So they're super talented, and they're a long time. He's a long-time steel worker and just trying to get by in Belfast. And so that really inspired me to keep finding those folks that they're similar
like
to.
him.
That aren't going to be the Yeats or the people that we know, but that were similar in terms of, it's got those the books that are more of Lapwing is the main publisher for him, but a lot of them are chapbooks, and they're hard to shelf, hard to get around, but I think that they've modernized some of their catalog, but it's still you have to be in a region to get to know these guys. So I managed to get some. I wrote him a letter years ago. He wrote me back, and so then we got going like that, and so then eventually I got a chance to go over there.
Cool.
And, so, but this is Louis Mcneese. This is To Posterity, written in 1957. So, when books have all seized up, like the books in graveyards, and reading and even speaking have been replaced by other, less difficult media, we wonder if you will find in flowers and fruit the same color and taste they held for us, for whom they were framed in words. And will your grass be green, your sky be blue, or will your birds be always wingless birds? Isn't that great?
Yeah.
Oh, and even just thinking about, like, he's using the word, media. They didn't really say media back in the late 50s. That seems very contemporary. Even, the idea of seized up. I think he's thinking mechanical, like a machine, but we think of how computers seize up, seize up now, right? It's
wingless birds, and the books. It definitely is prophetic of where we are today, and
it's amazing.
It's
absolutely amazing.
Written 65 years ago. 65 years ago.
Yeah, maybe even pull that math out. Like we got quite a bit. 60 plus years ago for sure. So, those are the kinds of things that poetry is constantly doing for me. That sort of, where I'll just find someone, and somehow these poems are relevant. I'm sure that you go through and you might scan through a book and you don't, maybe something didn't connect or this that, but then boom, there's just.
That Kevin Young put together an African American anthology here a couple of years ago, and he went back to pre-Revolutionary War. He went back to Phyllis Wheatley. Was that her name? I think, and she was this incredible African American poet that was writing before the Revolutionary War and then just after. And it was like, and it's relevant language to what our experiences are today. I mean, that's one of the things about poetry, I think, is that it does do well over at least a couple centuries, a few centuries.
It's amazing, and it's amazing to go back and find those things, right? And then you get the privilege of that sort of. Kevin Young is amazing, and it's I imagine he's like that sense of like kind of Indiana Jones type of, you're trying to find that treasure. And it's out there. That's the amazing thing with poetry. You can be successful.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, what else? Is there anything else you want you wanted to get out that you want to talk about before we read another poem or anything? Or
well, I guess the thing too that I think about is, as far as with that Mcneese poem, and considering how it becomes sort of like a warning, right, to the future, that whatever way that we're going to communicate, whether it be speaking or writing, in the most dumbed down sort of terms, predating the idea of texting, and
sound bites.
I find it encouraging that we get this warning from such a brilliant poet who still makes a go of it, but isn't as famous as Audener's contemporaries of the day. Just
Right.
that one slight notch down below there,
Right.
and
And-
can still read and find.
And-
There's,
Go ahead.
oh, I was going to say so I think that for folks that are still writing poetry, that these things will survive. The technology things will go for better and worse, back and forth.
Yeah, and I mean, so much of what I see, and I think of what you're kind of referring to, is also it's sort of pandering to that 5-second soundbite, which has to do with whatever's going on in the world and the whole media circus, or just trying to sell you something or something like that, as opposed to poetry seems to be more contemplative. Because I thought what was ironic about that poem is it's a very small little poem,
Right.
very few words, but he
it's a
does a
short
lot.
word.
He
Yeah.
does a lot of communicating with very few words.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think that that's one of the things where the notion of this is that the media and having some at least a healthy distrust of whatever the next thing is probably good.
Mm-hmm.
And then also that notion of fame or notoriety is silly.
Yeah.
So
Right.
because we get that, unfortunately, we get that messaging part.
Oh, yeah. I
With
mean,
that,
that's-
so
That's a part of the culture, and it has to do with the whole capitalist-driven thing, I think.
yeah.
just-
So but people with poetry will last. So someone 70 years in the into the future for him can pick that poem up
Right.
and be inspired by it, talk about it a little bit, put it on another media format where at least a few more people can get it in a positive way. So using the tool is in a useful and
Right.
useful way.
Right.
So
And before you read us another poem, I also, while I'm still thinking about it, before I run out of time, I don't know when that's going to happen, but I've always I've thanked you many times personally, but I want to thank you publicly because I mean basically you are the dude that because you decided you wanted to publish books, because you had this desire to spread poetry in the world,
Yeah.
you invited me in, and you did it in more than, you did like 3 different times we did something together. You did something for me or with me, and so I wouldn't be sitting here or having this conversation with you probably if that hadn't have happened. So I appreciate that, man. You know I do. I won't give you a hug. The microphones will go off.
yeah,
you know.
right. Absolute honor. It's absolute honor and privilege. So that you're willing to take a gamble with a couple of knuckleheads who thought that they could produce some nice looking books, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and that's what along the lines of a lot of times people, that's I think that back and forth sort of being open to try something new with some guys that said they can produce this, because it was key also with your first book, sold through that run, and then that was pivotal to setting up the next one. Right.
Right,
And then we did
right.
the second printing even with that, right? And
Right.
that was sold, and I could bankroll the next project with these
Right.
small projects like that. Then the next one sets up the next one, which I
Yeah.
love is a little bit of, cause, I think that's one of the things as poets that we should always be looking to the future somewhat. Mayakovsky, Russian poet Mayakovsky is one of my favorites, and he's always described as a futurist.
Yeah.
And the way that he's addressing the folks of the future, like, all poets are futurists, just like all poets are working class. They're working in some way. But I think about that also that was part of driving that publishing system, to have one where it pays for the next, pays for the next, until.
And you mentioning that, I mean, it brought that back to me. I remember you talking about that as you went along, because I thought, well, this is great. I mean, he's going to go into the publishing game, but then you brought that really back into the reality of, well, if this does well, then we can do another one. It was that tenuous aspect of doing the leapfrog thing, and then so. With you, I mean, you went to, I believe after me, you probably went to Dave Thomas.
Dave Thomas,
and the
yeah.
Hellgate Wind.
Yeah.
Which, that's that book, and it has a cover design by A. Sloan, who has passed away in the last few years, and then this one was the next one. Roger Dunsmore, Tiger Hill, and his wife Jenny Feline did the cover on that book, and then you did another one for me, which and this is called Blue Horizon, and this thing is out of print. I mean, you can't find any of these.
Yeah.
And the cover was done by David J. Spear, who's a award-winning teacher, photographer up on the Flathead Reservation. Recently, one of his students won some kind of a huge contest for photography. I can't remember where at, but so it's just you know, it's a local thing kind of, but I just think it's a wonderful trip. You know, to have all these things kind of happen.
And it's funny you mentioned like that these things being unavailable because they're selling out. I mean, that was the whole point. That one carried the next one, set up the next one, set up the next one.
There's a great poet that has a bookstore down in Livingston called Elk River Books, and he's publishing too. Matter of fact, he just published fairly recently, he published a book of Greg Keeler's sonnets. It's just incredible. I mean, it's like 200 sonnets, and they're just amazing. You know, Keeler's one of the great poets, I think, of our lifetime in Montana. And anyway, I went there to do a reading, and Dave and I drove down in the pickup, you know, to do this reading. I think we had, you know, typical poetry reading, right? There was like 8 people, maybe 10 showed up. But while we were there, on the shelf, he had a copy of that Blue Horizon book on the shelf, and I said, "Oh wow, you have a copy of that?" He goes, "Yeah," and I said, "Well, that's out of print." And I went over and looked at it. He had a $40 thing on it, you know, because I said, because it was like a rare book, and I said, "Well, it is rare. You should jack that up to $140."
Yeah. Isn't that funny? Scarcity. Well, and that's a whole different game, right?
Yeah, like, right. So people, rare books.
But people really do value those things, right? I've had, because now I've been, as far as with my own writing, having about 20 years worth. I don't quite have as long a career as some of the other folks, but about 20 years, and you'll run across people that have gone on and done different things, and they'll want to get a copy of that book, and maybe they've even had a pretty successful career. And so that $40, if that person was your student at some point or saw you at a reading, that $40 isn't any big deal when they're living in San Francisco, paying the rent in San Francisco, and
right.
So,
actually, the guy that just wound up publishing this last book that I had works for the Drumlummon Institute. He's the executive director, Aaron Parrott, who is just a Renaissance artist on all levels. I mean, he writes fiction, he writes poetry, he writes essays, he teaches comparative literature, he plays guitar and writes songs. He had a career as a songwriter down in Georgia and performer for years. Anyway, God Almighty! See, this is I start digressing, and I get lost in what the hell I'm talking about. I was talking about Aaron. But what were we talking about before Aaron?
Well, you're talking about the prices on those books and the rare books and scarce books.
Oh, collecting, Because I mean, Aaron and his wife also run a paper here in the state called the Montana Senior News, which is a fairly popular thing with a bunch of gray-haired people around these days. And one of the articles in there was about collecting. Because he's a compulsive collector. He said like he hadn't parked his car in the garage in years, Right. He just gets into collecting something. He has to have it all, so.
I think that's the part that's great. You mentioned earlier when we were talking about like Charles Bukowski, he had such a follow, well, he still does, but especially through the 90s, and people would buy those old beat up chapbooks.
Oh yeah.
Spend a fortune, right? So now we get to see that next generation where folks are still doing the same, trying to find these small press.
So maybe that is my legacy. I'll be able to, will all those old books, and they'll be able to sell them to rare book collectors.
Look at that. Well, we got to be careful not to flood the market.
You got to read us one more poem before we get out of here, because I just got the signal, and we have just bullshitted our way right through an hour here real fast.
Yes, we did, and it's been fun to do.
Yeah,
so
kidding.
How about I'll do a small one for the poppies, since we were just out smelling flowers right here downtown just the other day, and how wonderful they were. And so this one's called After Isa, thinking about Japanese haiku poet Isa, who wrote a lot about bugs. So I like to write about Andre the Giant, big stuff, and also about bugs, little stuff. These are about the bees. The bees are lost in the orange-layered crown of the poppy sprung wildly in my front lawn. Bees, fly fully in your frantic curves of joy, for I have no design for firing up the rusting lawnmower. Like a breeze falling down the slopes of Mount Humphreys, may the gods of our universes tend to their jobs gently, if they must at all.
Yeah, all right.
Yeah.
Nice one to end on.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's wonderful to get to catch up and talk a little bit about poetry, and I hope that there are a lot of people out there that are poets, that are writers, that are that maybe get a little bit of I don't know, instruction or anything useful just off of what we're talking about, entertainment maybe.
I mean?
But I hope so, because it is. It sounds funny to say, but I do think it's noble and it's honorable to continue to write these poems and to continue to find a niche in their lives where they can get these moments and these small images, metaphor, and get them together and be able to say thank you to the people in their lives, and pay tributes to the people in their lives, and preserve them just a little bit longer and in a way that might last for 70 years, 100 years, and who knows? Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's incorruptible because there's no money in it.
That's right.
That's the other part. This may be the truth, or at least this person's truth, because they're not trying to sell you anything.
No, we got that going for us.
Yeah.
All
right.
We're
out of here. James J., thank you for joining.
All right, thanks, Mark Gibbons. Wonderful.
See you next week.
All right, thank you.
Bye.
Got a lifetime filled